Hello there, good evening, and welcome to this live discussion. We are examining what is facing us as a nation, the constitutional crisis that is looming. What we're going to do tonight, we're going to be here with you for the next hour or so. I have with me in studio Madam Gail Teixeira. Madam Teixeira, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much, Eddie.
All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to be talking with you for the next 58 minutes or so, and of course during the course of the evening and the course of the program, we're going to be taking your calls wherever you are. I know we're getting to the folks on the Essequibo coast, the folks in Berbice, as West Berbice and East Berbice, in Demerara, and there are a lot of folks who also can join us on Facebook. NTN TV-radio. So you go to NTN TV-radio on Facebook if you want your relatives in the Linden area, in Bartica, and other parts of the country, and even overseas who would want to view this program. Of course, you can encourage them to check us out on NTN TV-radio on Facebook. All right, so Madam Teixeira, we have 76 hours and counting left before Guyana slips completely into a constitutional crisis as a result of the actions of the government. Clearly, the president at the helm of all of this. How did we get here, though? If just for the sake of background, to give people a perspective.
Well, I think people, and it's very funny, wherever I go, people ask me two questions. When are the elections going to be held? And two, what happens after March 21st? And so I think a lot of our people are cognizant of what's going on, but just to recap, on December 21st, a no confidence motion was passed, and the Speaker announced that the motion had carried, so it's a resolution of the Parliament, which means it's an act of the Parliament, and that is something that the Constitution recognizes. The government tried to have the Speaker reverse it, the Speaker said no, and that the government then went to the courts. January 31st, the Chief Justice ruled that one, the motion was valid, that the majority, 33-32, was valid, and that furthermore she ruled that as of the night of December 21st, when the government was defeated by the no confidence motion, that the government, cabinet and president were resigned. Those are her words, and that the functions could only remain until the elections were held on December 21st, on or before December 21st, or by an extension of Parliament. We are now 76 hours away, and we have, despite the leading opposition proposing an alternative to try to break the ice. I see in the papers today all sorts of people saying the politicians must get together and to find a solution to this. The problem is that we in the PPP have been extraordinarily controlled, and since December 21st, we've not been triumphalists, we've not been inciting people, we've not been having, telling people to do all sorts of wicked things. That if the table was turned, Eddie, and this had happened to the PPP, some of us would know what would have happened. We've been very measured and tempered, and we have been going through the process. We've gone to the courts with the appeal cases the government has brought in, now before the Court of Appeal. But we've also been very clear in also offering to Mr. Granger that there is a way we could have got out of this, and we offered to have elections prior to the expiration of the list on April the 30th. Within the 50-odd days it was available, it could be done. It would require, though, that this president, on the weekend after the meeting with the leading opposition, had announced the date of election, and he could have had it on April 29th. There would have been time for all the statutory requirements for the elections, and that he could have then gazetted next day the dissolution of Parliament, or from the 21st, so we could have gone to the Parliament, given him the extension, because we said we would give him the extension if he agreed to that, and therefore the government would be in order, the government would have been legal, and we would have had elections. But the opposite didn't happen. The president said, no, he ignored us, actually. He didn't even say no. It was just, when you drop a hot potato in a crowd, no one bothers with it and just ignore it. He ignored everything we said, including the efforts by the opposition commissioners to actually give him a time frame to show how this could work. So we are now 76 hours away, and the Court of Appeal is not finished, and that the government has made it very clear they'll go to the Court of Appeal, the Caribbean Court of Justice. The commissioners in GECOM are saying house to house that belong to the government. And the president is saying, as of his address to the nation on Friday night, business continues as usual, the legislature is functioning, the judiciary is functioning, and that he is waiting on GECOM. This is a recipe for disaster for our country, and therefore we are actually in the last 76 hours, and by the way, the president's gone off to Cuba, and I appreciate his illness, and he has to take care of himself. But certainly could have delegated to his prime minister or to the acting president, Mr. Greenwich, to meet with Mr. Jagdeo to see, is there last minute anything that we've done? Or we've got his silence. So, what we're on the edge of, my dear viewers, is that we're on a constitutional crisis that has been created by the president and the APNU AFC coalition government, and that really what we're in the midst of, as of midnight of March the 21st, is a coup d'etat. This is where the government has overthrown the constitution, in other words, and that is what is a very serious situation we're in now.
We're going to talk a little bit more, Ms. Teixeira, about what to expect and so forth,
yes,
as we go beyond the 21st of March. And for the folks at home who want to share your views, who maybe want clarifications, questions answered and so forth, the number to call, it's on the screen, 226-3310. All right, and remember when you're calling, please turn the volume of your television sets down so that you don't give us that feedback in the studio. Do you want us to take some calls as we go along?
Sure, no
Let's
problem.
Let's take the first call. Hi, hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Hello?
Hello, yes, we're hearing you.
Yes, I'm happy to have this program here. You're doing a fine job. I've been looking at it the past few weeks. But I want to say that the time the clock is ticking, and these people don't have any intention of moving. Everybody is at tension now. Everybody getting anxious and very uneasy. What I think should happen after the 21st, the PPP should stop the action. Try to get to mobilize people more. I know they're mobilizing people, but they need to mobilize people more to get them on the street and protest and whatever. In a peaceful way, I know PPP is always peaceful. They should arrange these things in throughout the country, countrywide. So such kind of message not only to Ghanaians, to the international community who are indeed watching. So I'm very thankful for what you all are doing and very good. Keep it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a good evening. If you want to respond.
Well, certainly I think that we have tried all the different recourses, and that there will be various forms of action, whether the PPP will have a legal. We have three areas that we're working on: legal, the diplomatic, and of course the political. And part of the political is explaining to people what's going on, what is going to be the impact. The legal, of course, in terms of the lawyers that are in the courts fighting the cases, and of course the diplomatic, which is the international community, the diplomats here. So we have a three-pronged approach. And obviously in the political is also areas of being, making the government know what we feel, and it's not just a few of us or the PPP leaders, it is the whole nation. People are very, very upset and want, it's one thing to like what the president did with the appointment of GECOM in terms of violating the Constitution. However, it's another thing to have a no confidence motion, no date, refuse to name a date, and then come on Friday night and try to whitewash what happened. There's been bad faith by this government. They do not intend to call a date, and if they do, the hard line is in the APNU and the AFC, and maybe Mr. Grange himself feel that there's a house-to-house registration. They want to stay in power as long as possible, as close as possible to when elections are due in 2020. The problem to do that is that the Constitution would have been violated on the night of March 21st. And what some people don't know is that when you have a president who is no longer constitutional and a government that's no longer constitutional, what will happen? Well, in terms of the president, if he's unconstitutional, he's in his position unlawfully and illegitimately because he no longer has the cloak of the Constitution protecting him, then he loses his immunities. Presidents have certain immunities. He will lose that on midnight on the 21st. And therefore, whenever elections are held or whenever he comes out of office, he could face serious charges to do with anything that he's done, which formerly would have been protected by immunities and which he would no longer have that coverage as of March 21st. He loses benefits in terms of the president, and would we call him president or not? I don't know. But the issue is that state resources which are being expended, and if they continue to do that after the 21st, they're not doing it legitimately, they're doing it unlawfully, and therefore, again, they're open to be charged and brought before the courts for the reckless use of our resources in a context where they have no authority to do that because the government has fallen, the government is unconstitutional, unlawful, and illegitimate. So there are very serious consequences for the president and the ministers, whether they think they can breeze through this and survive this and nothing will happen to them. Well, nothing may happen to them now, but once there are elections and we're in government, they are going to face some consequences for grossly violating the Constitution and knowingly and willfully doing it. You know, it's one thing to make a mistake. This is not a mistake. This is clearly willfully violating our Constitution.
All right. I'll probably take another call, but I want to say I realize, and I suspect you will recognize, the president and his cabinet has been repeating this one mantra.
Yes.
I remain president until the next president is sworn in. Totally ignoring the fact that the Constitution, by virtue of Article 106.6 and 106.7, would have given a timeline within which you remain president until the next president is sworn in. I know you want to respond to that, but let me take one call.
Yeah, sure. Sure, go ahead.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
So, Ms. Teixeira,
Good evening.
my humble respect to you. One question I want to find out. I can remember when Dr. Cheney was alive in the British Constitution, right?
Right.
They suspend the Constitution. And then what happened? It's something similar like this what is going on now?
What year was this? Which suspension are you talking about? 1953?
Yes.
1953, okay. No, it's completely... Explain to you?
Oh, all right.
Yes. What's the difference between the suspension and this?
Not the problem, sir.
Sure, will do.
Thank you for coming through.
Thank you. In 1953, we were still a colony, and the PPP had won the first elections where universal suffrage was brought in, and so the PPP won 18 out of 24 seats in the National Assembly, the legislature at that time. The British brought in their warships, and the British Colonial Office suspended the Constitution of Guyana, removed the PPP government, and put in an interim government. Now that was a constitution under colonialism. In 1966, there was a constitution brought in as we became independent, and then in 1980, you remember in 1978, the government, Burnham, held a referendum. The elections were supposed to be held in 1978, and the elections were postponed from 1978 to 1980 on the basis that the new constitution was going to be made. They had a referendum which asked people, do you want the new constitution or not? People boycotted it, and the elections were rigged. That referendum was rigged, and then in 1980 they brought in the constitution, and no one had seen it. There was no consultation, which gave Burnham imperial powers, in fact greater powers than the President of the United States. In 99, 2000, well, both in 95 to 97, we went through constitutional reform, which was incomplete under Chelly Jagan, as we had elections, and Chelly had died. And then 99, 2001, we went through a massive, extensive constitutional reform, which removed a lot of the imperial powers, what was called imperial powers of Burnham. It brought in a whole gamut of changes to Parliament and the powers of Parliament and the deliberative areas. It brought in areas to have greater inclusion of the opposition in the parliament, in the committees, particularly the oversight committees, and also made major changes in terms of GECOM and the appointment of GECOM and other constitutional bodies and the role of the leading opposition. So the difference is the 1953 Constitution was the British colonial, Britain doesn't really have a constitution, but they had constitutional provisions for the colonies and norms and conventions, and they suspended. So the two are not analogous. They're not the same thing. This is not where what the government has done is that there is a constitutional requirement. It has ignored it, pretended it doesn't exist, justified why they're not paying attention to it by using GECOM and the legal recourse as the two pillars on which to have no action. So it's bad faith, and then to then say, well, we won't have elections. And on 76 hours before, we still don't have an idea of when elections will be held.
Good evening.
Hello, good night.
Hi, good evening, sir.
Can I get to explore?
Yes, go straight ahead.
I want to say one thing. When the years from everybody complain. I want to ask, all these cases have been tried by Bachelorians and the rest of them. Where the money come from? I think before the commanders they all have here, right? And Bachelorians, the people should go to the court, they should charge them. They are fighting one thing all the time, and they're losing all the time.
All right, things are coming through, sir. All right?
Okay, sir.
All right, should we take probably two more calls and then
Sure.
we probably go to you to respond to these. In the meantime,
Yes,
we're
of
waiting on the
course.
phone. But I want us to talk a little bit, Madam Teixeira, about the President's address to the nation.
Yeah.
Talking about the authority of the legislative branch is unimpaired, saying that it's in session. But he hasn't called, or the government who is responsible for setting the agenda, I understand, for Parliament, or to call for sittings, they haven't called for anything so far. And they're acting with no longer cabinet, they have
The plenary ministers.
plenaries and so forth, which are all indication that they themselves accept the reality that the government has fallen. However, I think that the reality that they can't accept is the fact that they will have to give up power, and I think that is where the problem is.
I mean, the president says in his address on Friday, the legislature is in place and that we have respected the legislature. That's not true. The legislature spoke on December 21st with a no confidence motion. You see, parliamentary democracy is based on the issue of accountability, and a government is elected by the people, and in the interim it is judged by the people and the representatives of the people in the parliament. And here you had the elected representatives of the National Assembly, 33, who said, we've lost confidence in you. We've lost confidence in you. The government lost its mandate to govern. And therefore, as of December 21st, the Chief Justice is right. They were resigned by the very nature of the passage of it. And by talking about the plenary means they can't ignore it completely, but they're in violation, in contempt of a ruling. They said that they have gone to the judiciary and stuff like that, and that's their right to go to the judiciary. The problem is this, is that they asked her to stay her ruling. She said no. They went to the High Court, and as of up to now...
The appeal court.
The appeal court, sorry, and up to now it has not been stayed. Therefore, the Chief Justice ruling of the 3 months is still ticking, and there's 76 hours of it. Chief Justice ruled on this on January 31st, not yesterday, January 31st. A full 6 weeks away when this could have been dealt with. You've had the leading opposition make a proposal on March the 4th. That is 2 weeks ago. Nothing has happened. So the fact that they're saying the legislature and it could be convened for an extension, that's highly debatable. Highly debatable because remember the Parliament is comprised of the President, the Executive, the Speaker, and the National Assembly. That is what makes up the Parliament of Guyana. Now, when the Executive has fallen, That's why when you have a new government and a president's elected, you then have the inauguration of a new parliament, because it's the president who does that. So if the president has created a coup d'etat against the government, against the country, against the constitution, then on what foundation is the legislature standing? And therefore the legislature has no foundation to stand on as of the midnight of March the 21st. There may be other aspects of the Constitution that could be, but one isn't certain. These are uncharted waters. In other words, as of March 21st midnight, should the president and the ministers be paid? And members of parliament paid? You know, and so I think that issue of the legislative judiciary, yes, they have a role to play. But in this case, I believe that if the tables were turned, and on December 21st, the motion was brought, and it didn't succeed, and we went to the courts to challenge whatever technicality or otherwise, this government would be making no efforts whatsoever to comply with any of these issues. They would make fun of going to the judiciary. You don't have the right to go to the judiciary. The matter's settled. And the last thing to do with the executive. It is very clear from the explanatory memorandum of the Bill of 2000, Constitutional Amendment, which brought 106.6 and 106.7 in. The explanatory memorandum makes it very clear that the purpose of the government staying in office is to hold elections. And I want to read, if you give me a little more, the 106.7, there's a language in legal drafting is very interesting. The Constitution says that the president calls elections at any time within 5 years. That's his right. He dissolves parliament and calls the election any time within 5 years. So this thing they talk about the courts that he's guaranteed 5 years. It's not so. The president can call election at any time in 5 years. And he remains president until the new president comes in. Except when we come to 106, 107, where 107 says, notwithstanding his defeat, so that is, you're defeated by no confidence motion, which is 106.6, the government shall remain in office and shall hold an election within 3 months. That's the first. Or such long a period as the National Assembly shall by resolution, supported by not less than 2/3 of the vote of all the elected members of the National Assembly, determine, and shall resign after the President takes the oath of office following the elections. The assumption in 106.7 is that, one, the government complies with the Constitution, which this government is not. So it complies with the Constitution and says, okay, elections within 3 months. Or have a different view. We need more time. We call it sitting on or before the 21st and say we need an extension, and they've talked to the opposition and they get the 2/3 majority to go in and change the date. But it has to be done by the midnight of the 21st. And the and part, and remains in office, has to do with the connection between the government doing these two functions. One, either calling elections in 3 months or an extension. So it's not automatically the president, he says in his speech address on Friday night that you're not to worry, I still remain in office and the elections are handover. But it's premised on the fact that you do two things, one of two things. You hold 3 months elections or you get an extension. It's not automatic that you stay there, even if you don't have elections, even if you don't have an extension. Then on what grounds are you standing? You violated the Constitution. And that's why we're saying what is going on as of December 21st midnight, unless things happen rapidly between now and then, is that you have a coup d'etat that's taken place. And you know what a coup d'etat is?
Yes, certainly.
And who the coup d'etat? Who is the subject of the coup d'etat? What is the subject of the coup d'etat? The Constitution has been overthrown. That's what you mean by a coup d'etat.
Yes. What we're going to do while we take some, let me take this one before we actually go back to the President's address to the nation. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, buddy. Here out outing.
Not bad at all, brother.
Good night to our farmer minister.
Good night.
Okay. Firstly, I must congratulate you for being on the program tonight. And secondly, I don't think the president respects the Constitution for this country. If you just make a ruling and he is a representative judge. On the day of his period, he takes the oath to respect the laws for this country. And he don't respect the laws. And matter of fact, of his minister, even though he respect the laws. After the force, after the force will do whatever is necessary to do. We will support Mr. Jackson. Everybody say that Jackson is not, he will not be president for this country. Right? President says he wants fit and proper people. Mr. Yearman is a fit and proper man to run this country. We party have fit and proper people, young people, educated people. We don't have pensioners that when they sit down they sleep. So I think the people, he should respect your life. He don't respect your life in this country. And I think that the force, we should come out and protest. They have to. Thank you.
Thanks for coming through, brother. All right.
Well, to answer the question before, Eddie, about the person who's paying for these legal cases, for the government, that is.
Yeah.
And I believe all of us are. The taxpayers are paying for those cases against us, against the people's right of this country to go to obey the Constitution and have a freedom of choice. Elections is our right to choose. It's a human right issue. So the Constitution is being violated, and our individual rights to choose has been undermined by this government. But we're paying for the cases, by the way.
I don't know if we should refer to them as actual cases. I think they are more like fishing expeditions they are on, because the ruling of the Chief Justice, the Speaker in the first place refused to say, hey, keep me out of this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's passed. And the Chief Justice made it absolutely clear that there is no grounds for anything to be overturned. There is no grounds for no extension. And despite the one vote that crossed from the government side, that despite being in the National Assembly illegally, that person, the proceedings that he participated in cannot be invalidated. So it's a fishing expedition. I think a lot of guys.
Well, I think the real purpose of it all is to delay and give themselves maximum time, because they're saying if they lose the case, first of all, the Court of Appeal will most likely not finish on the 21st. Some aspects are being heard on the 22nd, and so by the time the Court of Appeal finish, we've gone past the 21st. Then the government has made it clear, if it doesn't succeed and the ruling is not favorable, they're going to the Caribbean Court of Justice. That could take quite a few months more. So they're buying time at the legislative level, using the legislative or judicial process to delay, to give them time. And they parallel that. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They got the other egg in another basket, that's GECOM, where they have control with the chairman and the 3 government people, to say, don't do anything. Don't do anything. Make no preparations, and we're waiting on you to tell us when you're ready. And GECOM doesn't know what to do. So GECOM is saying, we don't have a date, we're not ready, and you have all these absurdities, 148 days, 128 days. So it is all about giving themselves as much time as possible. Clearly the intention, the objective is to shove aside the Constitution and rule, stay in.
Good evening. Hello, good evening. Hello. I think we lost our one there.
Yeah.
But the interesting question is, the appeals court will be dealing with some aspects of the matter on the 22nd.
Yes.
Let's say.
Actually, I think they're dealing with the stay.
The stay.
It's stay on the 22nd.
But the time, and that's the point I'm about to make. The time would have passed.
Yes.
Yes. The 21st would have passed. So what is the purpose of the stay then, if you've already passed the time? Let me take this one before you respond. Good evening.
Hi, good night.
Hi, good night, sir.
Good night.
I'm Comrade.
Good night.
Yes, go straight ahead. We're hearing you, sir.
Yes, sir. I am watching this program, and I get the impression that Comrade Gail is saying that the leader of the opposition is prepared to meet with the president once more if the president so indicates to iron out these issues. Now let's make it clear. We have to understand the nature of the leaders of the PNC. for you to be in the leading position of the PNC, you have to be, one of the qualities is you have to be a great liar. Number two, you have to be a great trickster. And we have seen these two qualities unfolding over the past month in the leadership of the PNC. And I believe if the opposition leader wants to go there again to discuss these issues, we will be tricked again. So I'm suggesting that a constitutional crisis is looming, no doubt about it. It's time we see the response of the international community, including CARICOM, and see how they will react to this illegal government in the next 3 days. And then Guyanese will know where we are. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming through, sir. Thank you so much.
Well, I think I must respond because I hope nothing I said gave you that impression that I was talking about the leading opposition willing to meet at these last hours. I was trying to point out that the leading opposition had offered on March the 4th for an option, and had the president put that in place on that very weekend of March the 8th, 9th, and 10th, we would be well on our way elections to April 29th. The Granger ignored it completely. And therefore, that option of even April 29th now is almost not possible either. And so but there is an issue that, and if Parliament has to be summoned, it has to be summoned by March the 21st, and no later than that. As I said, unless there were other mechanisms that had to be found, so that we are not the ones that Mr. Granger has not given a date. He has not said a word. He has been playing the ball between GECOM and the judiciary. We are the ones who offered a date. And if Mr. Granger were to wake up tomorrow morning and say, click a date out of his hand, and he says, December, February next year, no, we won't. There'll be no meeting. We won't go. But, they also have to recognize that a constitutional crisis is one in which will have dire consequences for our people and our nation. And if there is a way that we can get Mr. Granger to obey the Constitution and comply before the midnight of March 21st, that would be best for the nation. And comply meaning elections. That's what we're talking about. The bottom line, there's no negotiation on anything else except elections and election date. And that the government has to carry out caretaker functions. It cannot be giving away land and carrying out contracts and all these things and giving out state resources like the head and good in these last 3 months. So that there's no, I hope I didn't give that impression to you, but I believe that I think when we come into the program more, we start talking about the consequences of the crisis. These are issues that I think our people need to be prepared for, because it's not going to be easy. A road, and it's uncharted waters. The Constitution or the laws of the country guide us in this at all. So we're walking, as they say, you're in a canoe with a paddle, with a half a paddle going up the Essequibo. You really, you don't have much. You have anything really except your political instinct and your political maturity and the collective wisdom of our people to be able to take this country forward. The irresponsibility and reckless behavior by Mr. Granger in particular, he bears a full brunt of the responsibility of what's going on in this country and what's going to happen.
But Mr. Shearer, one of the things you're hearing a lot, and I think Mr. Harman was in New York, I think at the weekend, and went there to tell the people in New York that, we have no problem, there's no crisis in there.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's fake news. And all sorts of things. So that's the information. So clearly there is no intention that you're seeing from the government, none at all, to honor the Constitution and to take any actions before the 21st of March.
I think they feel confident, that nobody's going to tell them anything. You've had the United Nations rep here.
Hold for me, sir.
European Union ambassador, European Commission ambassador, the British High Commission on several occasions have made comments. The new US ambassador came in and has talked about rule of law and free and fair elections. they're speaking in polite, diplomatic language to the government. In other words, they're saying to the government, obey. Obviously, I believe that in some of the international community, they're hoping that the government recognizes what dangerous waters they're going to be going into and will pull themselves back at the last minute. However, I don't think we should be dependent on the international community. We need to work with them and to get whatever support we can get from them. But it is the people of this country that really have to be able to show that they are offended, opposed to this coup d'etat by Mr. Granger and his government.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening, sir. Go straight ahead.
Good night to the panel.
Good night.
Good night. Madam Teixeira, I've seen a program. I've seen a program with Mr. Imran Khan, public information. He is making some reference. I don't know if it's kindergarten he's speaking to or what, but something is definitely wrong. I think he should be ashamed of what he's doing. On the 24th of December is a total different situation
Exactly.
from that year back. And that is what I want this country to know. It is a total different situation. It is a no confidence motion at past. So these are the things that we're supposed to be doing and knowing.
All right, thanks for coming through, sir. All right?
Thank you.
All right. I think he's referring to the 2006, and I think that when Mr. Jagger at the time said he was waiting on GECOM and so forth.
Well, 2006 is a really interesting anomaly because all the elections, and Christopher Ram's article on Sunday showed that in fact the elections were all held within the 3 months, except 2006. In 2006, this was in the midst of the crime wave, for example, and that it is GECOM on April the 13th, by a decision, says to the government, says to the president, we don't think we can make these elections by August the 4th. And that's a unanimous decision on GECOM. This is months before the election. This is April the 13th. Elections weren't due until August the 4th, by the way in which they calculated the whole thing. So this is GECOM early on saying to it, the president announced a date. There was no compulsion to name a date. He doesn't have to name a date in April if you have elections in August. It's 3 months before. However, in the meantime, there were laws that had to come, election amendment laws that had to come in to do with scrutineers, which was an agreement between the government and the opposition, continuous registration, etc., etc. These were all negotiated between the government and the opposition. And the laws were passed on April the 13th. The Electoral Laws Amendment Act of 2006, assented to by Mr. Jagdeo on the same day, April 13th, 2006. And then there was a constitutional amendment brought. A constitutional amendment brought on table on April the 27th and debated and got 2/3 majority on May the 2nd, that only for the 8th Parliament that the 3 months was extended to 4 months. May the 2nd, right? And that was passed in the House. Mr. Jagdeo signed that constitutional amendment bill the same night. And the same night, Mr. Jagdeo dissolved Parliament. So he had the 4 months. So you're talking about August 4th, and named the date of August 28th for the elections. So the elections were extended for 3 weeks. But because this was triggered by GECOM saying very early on, we won't be able to do this because of X, Y, and Z. There were some technical problems and they needed some of the legal changes to come into effect, and they had not been brought into Parliament, or they were sitting in Parliament actually at that time, waiting to be debated, and were debated 2 days after the announcement by GECOM. At that time, Mr. Corbyn, the leading opposition, wanted elections to be held not in August, but in November 2006. And so he wanted the extension even more. And so there were a lot of negotiations. The difference between 2006 and now is that the PPPC government and the president adjusted the time by the use of the legislature, which was under the Constitution. So nothing was done outside, underneath, behind the Constitution. It was done with the Constitution, the mechanisms available in the Constitution, by an amendment for the 8th Parliament only, the extension of time from 3 months to 4 months. In fact, I just want to remind Mr. Imran Khan, he's not even listening, he may be listening.
He may be listening.
But, yeah, because he's probably going to come out with something else. I want to remind Mr. Imran Khan that the same 2018 local government elections, Mr. Bulkan brought an amendment to the same election laws that were amended in 2006 to extend the life of the voters list from 3 months to 6 months. The voters list for local government elections was supposed to be July to August, August to September, September to October. The law says 3 months. So all these 3 months is constitutional 3 months, laws 3 months for when you bring elections. So in other words, GECOM must always have a list that's 3 months valid. It is Mr. Bulkan who brought the amendment in Parliament in October 2018 to extend the life of the list from 3 months to 6 months. And that's how we come up with April 30th now. That's how we come up with April 30th now. So it's okay to do it for local government elections. And by the way, although only 80 authorities voted in that period, the list was for the entire nation. And so it went to all the areas whether they were voting or not, because some part of the country are not part of the local authorities. So about 20% of the list were persons who would not vote in the local government election. But so this is not rocket science. And so the use of Mr. Khan as saying 2006 we did this, it was in April, elections weren't due until August the 4th. It is not the same thing now when there's a no confidence motion on December 21st, and the 3 months is the same 3 months that is always that GECOM has to have availability for 3 months election. And suddenly GECOM, with a 3-month deadline, constitutional deadline, suddenly finds itself unable to do it, does nothing. It's not that it couldn't do it did nothing so as to make sure it did nothing.
Good evening.
Good night.
Hi, good night, sir.
I'd like to make 3 quick points. 4th point. Does not the government have an appeal, and you have to wait till the appeal comes through before you talk about constitutional crisis? The second thing, the Constitution changed from 2006 to now when Baron Javier said that the Election Commission has the authority to call election, only them alone to call it. And the next thing, you are a respectful woman, Mr. Shearer, and I don't see how you could sit in and have people who don't have no dignity in them controlling you. Because when you was minister, Home Affairs minister, and you try to press the radical, they never give you back a ministerial position because they like for you to do the radical. And I don't see a woman with all this class who you have, that you sitting there and got people like Barjab, you them control you. I'm ashamed of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, just let me clarify the very last point. After going through the crime wave, and by the August 2006 elections, I said to Mr. Jagdeo and Mr. Ramatar, who was my general secretary of my party, after those elections, I said to them, gentlemen, I don't want to be a minister anymore. I've been in various ministries, and my whole desire was that if you be a minister for too long, sometimes you can get complacent. And I didn't want to get complacent. I wanted to still be able to kick some butt every now and again. So I asked to not be made a minister. I was offered ministerial positions. So it's not fair to say that about Mr. Jagdeo. And Mr. Amatar was president in all of those things. So was Mrs. Jagan. She was alive at that time. On the GECOM issue, no, the Constitution was never amended to give GECOM the power to call elections. It was in only one part of the Constitution where GECOM can have any say on changing the date of an elections is after the date has been given. So once the date has been announced, the parliament's dissolved, the RDCs are dissolved, and the GECOM finds that on the on the appointed day, that is, on the appointed day of election, so let's make up a day, August the 4th or whatever, and on that day, or just before that day, GECOM believes that there is serious hardships or danger. It has to call in the Prime Minister, the leading opposition, and say, look, generally for the whole country or a specific area, we have these concerns. And it's only two grounds: serious hardships and or danger. And then GECOM can not postpone generally, it has to give a specific date. It has to say from August the 4th to August the 6th, whatever, and it has to be gazetted. That's the only place where GECOM has a say in the date. So GECOM has no power whatsoever to set a date. GECOM may be able to say to the president, we've done a number of timelines, and here you can have it on on March the 19th, you could have it on March the 10th, you could have it on March the 21st itself. Here are the three options. That's what GECOM does from a technical point of view, to say to the president, we can comply with all the statutory requirements, because you have to have so many days for the parties to put in their candidate list, so many days for the list to be publicized, etc. And so GECOM, as of December 22nd, could have, within a flash, within a week, minimum 1 week, GECOM could have given the president a series of options, all within March 21st, and didn't. They started it the weekend, same December 22nd, and something happened.
But
something happened.
And I think, though, I'm not sure, I think you didn't mention the fact that, I think it's Article 62.2 you're referring to, where GECOM can...
yeah, 162.2.
162.2.
Yeah.
But also, for GECOM to make that suggestion, a date has to be named
Absolutely.
in the first place.
Yes. It can't do it when there's no date.
So, GECOM can say on the appointed date, or
yes,
whatever it is, because of serious hardship or danger in this particular area, we'd ask that the elections be postponed for this period.
Yeah.
So that's a very important thing, that a date has to be named. We have absolutely no date now.
I mean, the GECOM under us would be asked, what are the time frames which would be the earliest dates you could bring it in, or whatever, and they would provide a scenario of what is possible. What has not happened is that the GECOM is saying we're not prepared. No date. The president goes and meets with the leading opposition, invites the leading opposition for a meeting, calls the leader of opposition in. We go with our proposal of April the 30th or before. The president doesn't have a clue of when GECOM could be ready. No idea when GECOM can be ready. Nor does he have any idea what money they need. So the meeting becomes a bit of a farce. The last thing, before I forget, the caller asked before about appeal and the government's right to appeal. The government has a right to appeal, but when a chief justice said that the 3 months is ticking, she is not staying the motion, the government has a choice, because you have to obey the first court ruling. And as even everybody else who's commented, until that court order is overthrown or upheld, that ruling of Chief Justice Roxanne George holds. And the government, in bad faith, has done nothing to bring that into being. It is, in fact, showed disrespect to the judiciary by just ignoring it completely, and actually is in contempt of it. So that they could have put an appeal, but they could still have been making preparations.
For the elections.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
In the very first place, confidence take preference before everything. There was no need for any case in the court. And two, Mr. Granger is the cause of all these things. First, he has 18 names to pick a GECOM chairman, and now not fit and proper. And now the government side has 4 people in GECOM office, and they always dominate the opposition. So I don't see what is the problem in this country. He is the president who is creating all the problem in this country. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you very
coming
much.
through,
Thank
sir.
you.
Yes. We have just about 10 minutes or so to go, so we'll probably take a few more calls.
Sure.
Let me take one more before you respond.
Right.
Good evening. Hello, good evening, sir.
We can hardly hear you.
I want to remind the Guyanese people that Granger at the North American Conference of the PNC in January, in November 2017, said this. A big question for members is how the party will retain office after 2020 when the elections are held. It was reported that Mr. Granger or his party supporters to pay attention to the party's strategy to attain and to hold on to political power up to 2020, stating, "You have to ask yourself how the PNC gained office in 1964. Ask, how did the PNC remain in office? And what did it do during that year? Ask yourself how the PNC regained office in 2015. Ask yourself how the PNC would retain office after 2020. David Granger, the Afrocentric, said, some board might, to the remarks of Granger, some board might read red meat thrown at the party faithful. And he further states, unlike other commentators, I am very clear that President Granger's comments in Atlanta acceptance that the PNC never faithfully won its own election. Now, what can be concluded from that action is, of course, open to the debate. I just wanted to state this. So this guy, these people didn't expect this no confidence motion. And it is quite clear that they would remain. Remember, he's an idol of Farnham been rigging elections. So what do you expect from this guy? He was one of the imposters all days in the army also. That's rigging too. So what do you expect? If you are a trained thief, you would always be a thief. So that's the only comment I want. There will be a constitutional crisis. These people will not come out of power. I don't know about no looming or impending constitution. There will be a constitution for the other side. But for he said there is no constitutional crisis. So they will continue there. Let's see what the CARICOM would do. They were quick to come in the Janet Jackson season, and they were quick to make a lot of recommendations in the Homage to the Court. Let's see what the Caribbean people will do. But I think one, you people may not like because you're a multinational party. Walter Rodney said that the Africans believe that they own the Caribbean for their long servitude and their association with land. And that's what's happening in Guyana and the whole Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming through.
Yeah, one of the things before I just want to remind the public of a couple things. In 2015, late 2015, GECOM decided that it would put in the 2016 budget a house-to-house registration. 2016. They put their budget of about $5 billion to have a house-to-house. And when the 2016 budget came up, as a constitutional body, a Minister of Finance panned it and reduced the budget to $2.9 billion, which was their regular operational cost or continuous registration. We asked repeatedly, when would there be a house-to-house? No. So that first of all, if they'd had the house-to-house as proposed by GECOM, that would have started in 2016, 2017, you have 2018, life continues, and then you have elections in 2020. However, it is very interesting that the government and government people in the GECOM wanted that house-to-house registration to start in July 2019. Put aside the no conference motion for now. That would have taken them to December, January. And therefore it is thought, there's speculation, that in fact the original plan of the government was have the house-to-house not in 2016 as proposed, 2019 roll over into 2020, have delays, and so the elections of 2020 would also not have been, would have been pushed further down the road than 2020 is constitutionally due. The no confidence motion put a spoke in the wheel.
Yes.
It disrupted the plan, in other words. And I'm quite convinced that that was the agenda of this government, to stay in long as possible, and past 2020 if it was possible, past the constitutional due time, which it would have been between June and September 2020. That's when we were due for elections, any time between there. And so I think that was the original plan. The no confidence motion shot that sky high, and therefore they don't want to move from that because they still believe that they have some entitlement or transport to stay in government past the due date. But I do want to say and therefore what is going to happen May 21st is that the president and the government are squatters. They're squatters in the ministry of the presidency and in the ministries and in the government machinery. They're usurpers. They've usurped the Constitution. They've overturned the Constitution. And for many people who are working in the public service, there's a lot of concern. Will they be paid, not be paid? Yes, they will be. They have to be paid. It is not the minister who signs off on the payroll for public servant salaries. It's the FS, the financial secretary. And they have $300 billion that's available, that was passed on December 14th for 2019. So they can't say they don't have money unless, they've been spending it a while and doing all sorts of crazy things. And if the figures they gave are wrong in terms of the state of the economy. So it's important for the public servants, the teachers, the nurses, all those people working in the ministries to know that there should be no problem paying you, because the minister is the one that signs off, is the financial secretary, and the PSs who manage the disbursements of the salaries and stuff like that. So I don't want people getting frightened of that. The issue is that the ministers and the president and the MP shouldn't get paid as of March the 22nd. And that's an issue I believe that may even end up in court as well. But the important thing too is that the impact on all of this politically is one thing, and people have been phoning and we must mobilize, we must protest. All that's going to happen in terms of picketing and marching, all peaceful. Because obviously the government wants to, as soon as we start talking about protest and stuff, they start threatening sedition. That's our right of assembly and our right to protest, and we have always protested peacefully. We've never been the ones who burn down anywhere or break up anything, or that's not our style as a political party, and I think the PNC and APNU take advantage of it, and they assume that, but they like to use it as a whipping boy. But that the issues that come before us is that the impact on our human rights, because fundamentally our human right as of March 22nd to choose who we want to be in government has been taken away from us, at least we don't know for how long. So unlike when we had rigged elections, the right to vote was there, but your right was being taken away from you when they stuffed the ballot boxes and the military took the ballot boxes and stuff like that. This is now where there are no ballot boxes, there's no date, so our right to vote is being withdrawn from us. And the other issue too, of course, is the economy. In this kind of situation, the economy is going to, people like to have stability, businessmen, investors like to have stability. And this is a danger that we come into as the no confidence period, as a crisis takes place. The government's irresponsibility to recognize the damage it will cause the economy, the damage it will create for the country, and most of all, the people of this country. It means cost of living and other things will go up because people, your business community is already under duress with exports and everything else, and what we're producing, what we're earning on the foreign market. And so the impact on the ordinary people it's going to increase. And so we are the responsible ones that have to consider all these factors. Not Mr. Granger and his team seem to be, or his plenary as he calls themselves, the plenary, seem to be unconcerned about the impact on the economy, on the people, on the quality of our lives, and most of all our human rights. They seem to be unconcerned about this. Mr. Harman flying off to the diaspora to tell them that is because he's trying to say there's no crisis. There is a crisis emerging, and you know what it is? And I'm calling it tonight a coup d'etat. That is, the Constitution is being overthrown. You know when they say, you think about coup d'etat, coup, that you have a coup, everyone thinks of a military coup. The military comes in and takes over. So in many parts of the world where you hear about coups, it's the military taking over and then handing over, sometimes to civilian government, sometimes ruling for years. The word coup means to overthrow. What Mr. Granger and his team have done, his plenary of ministers, is that they have overthrown the Constitution. And if the Court of Appeal upholds the Chief Justice ruling, and they go further to the Caribbean Court of Justice, this is another insult and another contempt of the Court of Guyana, which Mr. Granger says he respects. But how can you respect and then not obey and not comply?
All right, Mr. Chair, I think we're almost out of time.
Yes.
The hour has gone so quickly, but we're going to continue to share as much information with you. We're going to be keeping you updated, keeping you informed as to what is happening as things unfold. We have just 75 hours left, from 76 to 75 now, before that
Countdown.
3-month
Countdown.
constitutionally imposed timeline for elections expires. But I want to share, Mr. Shearer, before we close,
Sure.
I have some figures here from the 1997 elections right up to the 2015 elections. And in 1997, the parliament was dissolved on the 27th of October, and elections were held on the 15th of December,
Right.
47 days after this.
Correct.
In 2001, and 2001 election was an unscheduled, if you want to call it, because of
Well,
the
our
issues
term
in
of
the-
office was closed. It was
Yes.
shortened.
So February 14, Parliament was dissolved. Elections were held on March 19th,
Right.
32 days after.
Right.
In 2006, and this is despite the delay that you spoke about earlier,
Right.
Parliament was dissolved on the 2nd of May, and elections were held on August 28th, 113 days after. Just a few
Below-
days beyond.
And below the 148 that Mr.
Be-
Lowenfield is talking about.
And then in 2011,
But it was
Parliament-
covered by Constitution. It was covered by the amendment to the Constitution.
In 2011, Parliament was dissolved on the 27th of September, and elections were held on the 28th of November. That's 62 days after.
Right.
In 2015, when Parliament was prorogued,
Yes.
Parliament was dissolved on the 28th of February,
Right.
and the elections were held on the 11th of May, 72 days
Yeah, exactly.
after. So all the elections that you're hearing there, save and except for the 2006, which is as a result of
Yeah.
a constitutional amendment, were held below 90 days.
Right.
So I want to leave you with that information. Mr. Shearer, I'll probably give you 30 seconds or a minute to wrap things up before we close. I think we're over into somebody else's time already.
Oh dear. Anyway, thank you very much, viewers, for listening to us. We're going to be coming to you every night on various television channels, radio, to keep you informed of what's going on. And of course, we have Pagua just around the corner too. And so I wish all our people, because Pagua is an event for all of us who enjoy it, and it's also the whole issue of good conquering evil, of new times, of new beginnings, of the spring equinox, and all
I
those
hope
type
it
of
does
things.
on the
So that
21st.
that is rather an auspicious time for all of this to be happening. I'm sure none of us knew about Pagua on the 21st of March when the no conference motion came. But we have to do a number of things as a people. This is not the time for us to be divided. There are many people sitting on the fence uncertain. There are many people who voted believing in APNU and AFC, believing that AFC could bring change, believing that the promises of APNU would have brought betterment to their lives, and they've been betrayed, and they know they've been betrayed. They know what their lives are now, and they have showed their dissatisfaction at the local government elections. And so this is a time for us as a people to recognize that there are many people who are hurting because, like the sugar workers and their families who lost their jobs, basically out of sheer vindictiveness of the APNU people. And then you have a whole set of other people who believed in APNU who are hurting as well. It's no longer any time to sit on the fence. It's a time as Guyanese, regardless of who we vote for when we go into the polls, we have to stand by our Constitution, the supreme law of this country. Without that Constitution to guide us, we're into anarchy. And therefore that is not going to be good for Guyana whatsoever. And so I think as Guyanese, as patriots, we need to stand up, defend our Constitution, defend the rule of law, and to defend our human rights. And to say to Mr. Granger, you have to obey the Constitution of Guyana. You have to. And for Mr. Granger, I'm sure, is he thinking about his legacy? What kind of legacy does a man want, a president want, which will put him in opposition, burn him with all his wickedness? He was very careful to make sure the Constitution allowed him to do a lot of the wickedness he did. not this. And so, Mr. Granger, you seems to be surpassing some of the things that Mr. Burnham did, and I would not think that would be a good thing on your biodata or your CV, do you?
It certainly wouldn't be.
So
Certainly.
keep in touch, stay in tune, stay steady. Don't be frightened. Don't be intimidated.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teixeira.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys, for being part of this program. Of course, as Mr. Teixeira indicated, we're going to continue to keep you informed as to what is happening as events unfold. We have just below 75 hours now, a few minutes below 75 hours. But we're going to be back to talk to you, to tell you more about what is happening. Until then, we want to say you have a good rest of the evening. Bye for now.
Okay, thank you.